From my side. This is the third talk of our this semester's lecture series. Today we have Professor Dr. Dirk Helbing from ETH Zurich as our speaker, and I think he'll cover an interesting topic which we see a lot of the times when we talk about digitization. So there are typically certain opportunities for using digital technology. I think we see that otherwise it wouldn't have that impact on our whole society. But on the other side, it's very important to look at how to design the technology exactly and how to embed it into our social system which we have in our society, and otherwise we might have negative effects that maybe outweigh the potentials the use of the technology could have. And I think that's also something we at eTech are deeply looking into, and that's why I'm looking forward to the upcoming talk. And I'll now hand over to Jörn Lammler, my colleague, who invited Professor Helbing, and he'll do the further introduction. So Jörn, the stage is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Matthias. It's a pleasure for me to introduce Dirk Helbing. We know each other from a working group of the Leopoldina Academy on democracy and digitization, and it was very interesting to discuss with Dirk Helbing this relationship because there are lots of issues he is seeing, and he has always a provocative thesis. On the other hand, there are good connections to the eTech because the design perspective, the Gestaltungsperspektive, is important at the University of Kassel. And I think Professor Helbing is also a scientist who wants to use the potentials of digitization to make democracy better, although he really is looking at the important and tremendous issues and problems. So let me say some words to the vita of Professor Helbing. He is Professor of Computational Social Science in Zurich, and also affiliate of the Computer Science Department. What is important for us, I think, is that he is a sociologist on the one hand, but a physicist on the other hand. He comes from, or his work during his PhD and habilitation is on physics in the fields of socio-econo and traffic physics. So he wrote his diploma thesis on the area of pedestrian crowd and evacuation modeling and simulation, and he introduced and established this field in European science. So he is also he got also an honorary PhD from Delft University, where he leads a PhD school, which is very interesting, with the title Engineering Social Technologies for a Responsible Digital Future. So I think he works with persons from the MINT subject and to learn how to be a responsible technological designer. Very interesting for the eTech program. Okay, so he has done a lot of work in media, in important journals like Nature and others. He's really have an impact and a big impact in the discussion on democracy and digitization. And therefore, we are very happy to have you here, Dirk Helbing, and we look forward to your talk. Thank you very much for coming.
All right, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm speaking to you from my home office in Zurich, and I need to share my slides. I hope this is going to work. And here we go. So this talk is going to be about the opportunities and dangers for democracies by the ongoing digital revolution. All right, the problems of the world are complex. We all know this. There's climate change, there's financial, economic, and spending crisis, conflict, mass migration, terrorism. But the most difficult problem maybe of all is the lack of sustainability. That means we're overusing renewable resources, and that is pretty bad. Actually quite dangerous, and it has existential implications, as we'll see later on. So the question is, will the digital revolution save us? Big data and AI are of course coming up at incredible speed. Big data age is here. Within just a minute, there are about 700,000 search queries and 170 million emails sent, and so on. And as we go shopping, as we move around, that all adds to this heap or sea of big data. There are many reasons or excuses to collect that data for sustainability. That means to save the world, for security reasons, because knowledge is power, or because data is the new oil. And we all know, since the revelations of Edward Snowden, that secret services are collecting a lot of data. But first of all, companies are collecting a lot of data, and this is called surveillance capitalism, right? So basically those companies, or many of them, are trying to get all information they can get and think of uses later on. And maybe one of the most shocking application that most people are probably not aware of is the possibility to find people through their voice profile. So suppose you go on holiday, you leave your phone at home because you want to do a digital detox, but then you talk to somebody at the pool bar, and that person has the smartphone with him or her. So that smartphone will be able to pick up your voice, identify you, find out where you are, what you're saying, translate it into some other languages, and search it for keywords, okay? And such things are probably happening all the time. So we should actually assume that most of what we say is being recorded and analyzed. In fact, CIA Director Gus Hunt said already back in 2013, we are already a working sensor platform, and it's really very nearly within our grasp, I mean CIA's grasp, to be able to compute on all human-generated information. And Google has told us that they know where we are, where we've been, and they know more or less what we are thinking about, okay? And you should take that very seriously. With all that data, and you could really go through everything up to your recent toaster and your smart TV and your car and so on. They're all collecting data. With all that data, some people are trying to build what one could call a digital crystal ball. Chris Anderson, back in 2008, had the dream that if we just had enough data, then basically we would see the end of theory. That means the data would reveal the truth by itself, and we would just have to do what it tells us. And of course, that big data revolution is combined with an AI revolution. So if big data is the new oil, then AI is the motor running on that oil, okay? And the vision was that basically we could now see what is wrong and fix the system. And so why should we have such a crystal ball that allows us to see what's going on in the world, in any place, in real time, and maybe even look a little bit into the future with predictive analytics? And of course, the military would work on such a thing, right? Assume it's there. But what else can be done? So basically, there is profiling going on. It's being done by companies, but not only. And that allows to construct digital doubles of us. This is not just a collection of data. It could be agents that can simulate our behavior and test how we would respond to certain kind of information and situations. And in fact, a lot is known about you. This is your income, where you live, who are your friends, what you buy, your consumption patterns, your personality, your health. And some companies are actually selling this kind of data or making it open for everyone to see. So your personality could be seen by your neighbors, colleagues, your friends, and enemies alike. And it could be very detailed, much more detailed than what is shown over here. And what can you do with this? If you have detailed enough digital doubles, you could try to simulate the world. And this is actually happening. So Sentient World is just one of those platforms that are being used for this, and maybe one of the reasons for global mass surveillance, because basically, in order to generate those doubles, one needs a lot of data about everyone. So just imagine we're being represented by a black box that can learn with machine learning. And if you feed it with enough data, it would become like us eventually, right? And so if you do that with everyone, then basically you can simulate the world. That's the idea. You can use it for good, you can use it for bad. I will see some of the applications later on. For sure, we're not only living in surveillance capitalism, we're also living in an attention economy. That means attention is a scarce resource. It's being sold in certain kinds of markets. If you can grab the attention of somebody, then it's possible to manipulate that person's thinking, emotions, decision-making, and behavior, right? And this is being used for Bread and Circuses 2.0, weapons of mass distraction, you know. Why are they talking about Corona all the time? Because we shouldn't see what's going on in world politics. We'll see it in a couple of months or years, what has happened at that time. Anyway, with all the personal information available about us, it's possible to target us, right? And that means behavioral manipulation. So there are companies that know us better than our friends and that are better at manipulating us. And we typically don't know even the names of those companies, right? They're just bombarding us with personalized information. Even if you Google, if you read news, you might get some personalized content. If you book your holidays, a hotel, a flight, if you use a dating platform, all that information may be personalized. And it's being used to manipulate you and your thinking and your emotions, okay? Yeah, and of course, it's possible to make a lot of money with this through personalized ads, but also it can be used for mass mind control, as a previous Google control room manager, Tristan Harris, has actually explained in his TED talk. I very much recommend you to view that talk. This has also been used to manipulate elections. By now, through insider reports, we know this has happened in more than 60 countries. a lot of democracies where we always thought that people would basically choose the candidates they like best and the best politics, but obviously this has not happened because weaponized propaganda AI has been used in order to manipulate millions of people. And that is based on cognitive science. It's known that the brain is consuming just about 100 watts. That's very little energy, in fact, not more than a light bulb. And it can do that only because it simplifies tasks and takes shortcuts in a sense. It doesn't make exact calculations in most cases. And as a result, it can be tricked, it can be deceived. There are cognitive biases that can be used against us. And in fact, secret services have learned how to do that and how to build digital tricks or digital tools to trick us, okay, to manipulate our behavior. And this is being used in order to control our behavior, because it's often being said that we don't behave in a healthy way, we don't behave in an environmental friendly way, we're misbehaving, and that needs to be fixed. And that fixing is being done through big nudging, for example, which is a combination of nudging and big data, personal data. And it allows to remotely control the thinking, emotions, decision-making, and behavior of people to some extent. Of course, not perfectly, right? But at least, there's some kind of Gleichschaltung and forced uniformity that is happening somehow through these kind of tools. But it's not perfect. And so in China, for example, they're using social credit scores in order to control people even more by giving plus and minus points to the behaviors that people show. And then in the end, there is this credit score that determines what kind of jobs you can have, what kind of countries you can visit, whether you can still use the plane or fast train, or whether you can use public transportation at all, and how fast your internet will be. So this is pretty shocking. It's actually the invention of a digital totalitarian state, right? A technological totalitarianism, as people call it. And of course, at least from China, we know there's censorship and propaganda, and I should say it's happening everywhere, right? So there's no country that's not using it. We're basically now, because of that personalization, even of web links. So if you click a web link and I click the same web link, we may see different content. That is creating a framework for a fact-free world, a fake world, if you wish. And it's possible, for example, to let people say what they've never said, and it would sound very realistic. It's possible to modify the mimics of people, even in real time. As you watch a video, the video could be manipulated in principle. The technology is there. So that's why technology billionaires are often saying that we're living in a matrix. And that's nothing that people who love freedom and free thinking would really please. But that's not the end of the developments. Technology is going even further than that. There are companies, and in particular the military, who are working on mind reading and mind control technology, right? So brain reading tech is coming. Something like technological telepathy is something that companies are working on. It's a combination of nano tools and neuroscience and digital technology that is basically allowing for unprecedented breakthroughs, opportunities, and unseen risks. Here it says, for example, nanoscience and nanotechnology are poised to provide a rich toolkit of novel methods to explore brain function by enabling simultaneous measurement and manipulation of activity of thousands or even millions of neurons. And this is called brain activity mapping. And in fact, companies are investing into storage space for that kind of brain indexing, okay? So basically, we would eventually move from surveillance capitalism, where companies know what we think and feel, into neurocapitalism, where they can manipulate what we think and feel and decide and do, right? And it's not invented by me, you know. Miriam Mackel, you probably know very well, is talking about that already for some time. There's also human-machine convergence, which people are working on, right? So the idea is that if we get old, our eyes may get bad, our hearing may get bad, our hips may get bad, you know, so we'll replace it basically by pieces of technology. And so we would turn into cyborgs. But eventually, you know, it would become really more and more difficult to tell machines and humans apart. And some people even want to upload human brain content and personality to the web, you know, to live forever in the cloud. Seriously. And that's not all. Some people are also working on creating a digital god. By creating digital technology, which is present everywhere. I know you've probably read this project has now been stopped, but there are satellites, of course, that can do that probably better. Omniscience or science, you know, so basically the attempt to know everything that's going on in the world through the Internet of Things, and omnipotence by the ability to increasingly effectively manipulating the thinking and behavior of people. Not only this, also companies are now creating artificial intelligence, super intelligence maybe, and they want to be emperors over life and death. So these are basically all the properties that we have ascribed to God. So do we have a digital God around? It would not just watch us all the time, but it would also interfere with our lives. Some people think, oh, that would be fantastic, you know. It knows much better what we should do. But Elon Musk and myself and many other people are skeptical. Such a digital God would certainly also do digital policing, right? So we see, for example, pre-crime. We hear that code is law, and actually we should take that seriously. I mean, algorithms are determining more and more what is possible to do and what not. So it's basically people are creating new natural laws, one could say. And so algorithms may turn correlations into causal relationships, and that could be pretty bad because certain kinds of people would be discriminated. We have read about that many times. But the situation is even more dangerous because if you want to have a sensitive tool to detect terrorists, then there would be many false positives. In fact, for every real terrorist, there would be 100,000 false positives. I mean, there are millions of people on watch lists. And not only would people be watched for stealing or burglary or for murdering people, but basically all their behavior is being watched and judged. For example, by the British Karma Police program. So they really want to judge the karma of a person, right? The value of a personality for society. So that's something like a digital judgment day, you could say. In particular, if we consider the next thing that is also happening, which is algorithm-based dying and killing, right? And why is this? Well, you certainly remember that back in the 70s, there was the limit to growth report that basically predicted that in this century, we'll see a shortage of certain kinds of resources, and that would lead to a collapse of the economy. It would also lead to a population collapse, right? Now, if you look at the orange curve, then you can see that basically 2020, the economy would collapse. You know, and now open the newspaper and read what we're seeing over there. Is it happening as a result of a mechanical interactions, or is it happening by design? Hard to say. But there are books like this one that tell us we need to learn to die in the Anthropocene. Reflections on the end of a civilization. And that's, I believe, the reason why we're talking a lot about ethical dilemmas. You know, if a car couldn't stop on time and somebody would die, couldn't be prevented, you know, who should die? The pedestrian, the driver, should it be, I will come to this later on. So that's called the so-called trolley problem, right? And so algorithms in cars would perhaps be able to identify through cameras the person in front. Is it a man or a woman, young or old, rich or poor, foreigner or citizen? You know, all of this could be potentially determined. And then questions come up, you know, such as, should grandma die or should the unemployed person die? You see, this is highly problematic, but nevertheless, there have been a lot of articles about this. And software has been developed to decide over life and death, in particular also in connection with ill people. That means software for hospitals and such kind of software is now being used actually for triage decisions, right? So software is now taking decisions about life and death. It could be your grandma's life and death, you know, maybe your life and death. And I've been shocked to find publications and scientific publications, in fact, about computer-based euthanasia, right? Now we're back to times where historians and other people and ethicists, you know, are asking, are we seeing eugenics again? Are being people put to death intentionally? Perhaps to reduce overpopulation, because that is something that some people have actually demanded. I think it's really time to say stop. This is a dystopian future. We don't want to live in such a future, right? How did we get there? Well, partly because of a reason that is rarely discussed, namely the petrodollar, right? The petrodollar connected to fiat currency means that whenever new money is being generated digitally, in fact, most of the time, you have to take oil out of the earth, sell it, burn it, which turns into CO2 and climate change. So there are several problems associated with that kind of system, but also with oil consumption, the population is going up. It's more or less proportional to each other. Then the question is, you know, what is the origin and what is the cause and the result? But anyway, you know, it's worth looking into the animal kingdom. And there, what we see is that basically, if you go beyond the carrying capacity, you would see a sudden drop of the population size, a population collapse, in fact, right? So if you over-fertilize a lake, for example, the fish population will explode. And this will be the result. A lot of fish will die. This is predictable and it's punishable. A similar thing has been done with planet Earth. It has been over-fertilized through the oil industry. In fact, after this limit to growth report came out in the early 70s, not only energy consumption has increased largely in the world, but also the energy consumption per capita, which is really not responsible at all. The disaster we are now seeing, that has been fabricated by humans, by neglect or intention. And now we're in big trouble, because the world, as people say, is overpopulated. So what should we do now? Certainly, we need to take care of sustainability and we need to take climate action. How can we do that? Now, number one, we can actually have nation states in the United Nations take actions. Typically, they do it by laws. Then pillar two is global corporations that come up with products, new services, and so on. So basically, they do things. But we all know that basically the climate emergency, as they call it, has not been solved on time. And that's why we're in such big trouble. So we need to be more effective. And that's why we need further pillars. And one of those pillars is actually what I call City Olympics, an engagement of civil society in a bottom-up way around the world. So citizens would engage in a friendly competition. The newspapers would, try to activate people and companies, also politicians would try to do that. And then scientific institutions, citizen scientists, hackathons, and companies, they would all try to come up with solutions, sell them, spread them. And then cities would be compared in terms of who had the best idea, the best new solution, who was more successful in spreading energy-friendly technology. And there would be different kinds of disciplines, so reducing climate change, reducing energy consumption, making a city more sustainable or more resilient, and so on. We all know that competition actually increases the quality of the outcome of people. Everyone would come up with would make an extra effort, and I would improve solutions actually, but we should actually combine competition with cooperation, right? So every other year, all those solutions that have been created would be available for everyone in an open source way. So that would be a Creative Commons license. Every city could take any of the solutions developed by any other city around the world. Companies could take those solutions, combine them with each other, develop them further. So basically, this would be a way to create collective intelligence globally. So there would be a new paradigm of globalization that I call localization, which is about thinking global, but acting local and diverse. It's about experimentation, learning from each other, and helping each other. And in fact, we did that in a small scale, the so-called Climate City Cup. There were different disciplines, and we even came up with our own device for air quality measurement. And so people could, for example, bike around the city and make these kind of measurements. And we were also interested in climate compensation of flights. We were interested in changing to public transport rather than using the car. And there were cities around the world that were participating in this. Hopefully one day this map will be really full, covered with symbols, because all the cities would participate in this. And in fact, you know, all in the universities could make a contribution to this. For example, we have often had summer schools and hackathons, such as the blockchain and Internet of Things schools. You see a lot of excited and very engaged students over here that came up with their own solutions. And I was often very impressed about what they came up with. We could also develop digital assistants to boost self-organization. I've been working on this in different projects. One was called Empower Polis, another one was called GrippyNet. Again, another one was called NervousNet for sensing. And we've been working on a project for responsible, sustainable consumption. In fact, the publication just came out. If you're interested in value-sensitive design, then have a look at this. How value-sensitive design can empower sustainable consumption. Rather than manipulating people through nudging, we're empowering people to find the products that would match their values, health, sustainability, and others, okay? But this is not all. I think we really have to engage into building a participatory economy and unleash the power of combinatorial innovation. So many people think we should combine cybernetics and synergy. And the way it has been done in the past was to create CyberSyn. That means basically a control room that collects as much data as you can get, and then to figure out a solution and then to impose it on the entire system. But synergy and cybernetics can be combined in a different way called cybernetics, synergetics, and it's based on self-organization. I will come back to this later on, okay? So this is based on the idea of bottom-up symbiosis and an information, innovation, production, and service ecosystem that we could build in order to allow for actually combinatorial innovation, not just exponential one. So how to make the world more sustainable? We propose to develop a new socio-ecological finance system. At the moment, every citizen in industrialized countries is throwing away 50 tons of waste. That's just too much. This includes tables and furnitures and cars and laptops and TV sets and smartphones, and a lot of which could actually be reused. But how to change this? By regulation, we haven't been very effective. I propose to do it based on empowerment, using the Internet of Things. I mean, create a measurement network that would give us locally feedback about the impact of our decisions and actions on the environment and on other people. We could measure and map noise, CO2, waste of all kinds, but also good things like in good air, education, culture, and so on. The principle would be to try to increase positive externalities and to reduce negative ones, and to ensure fair compensation, but not in a one-dimensional currency such as euro or dollar, but to do that in a multi-dimensional way, right? So there would be different accounts for different kinds of resources in principle. And such a system can now be built, for example, by combining the Internet of Things with blockchain technology. That means the Internet of Things would be used to measure certain kinds of resources or poisons or problems or things that are good. And from this, new currencies could be derived that would create feedbacks in the system that would create new forces in the economy that would be geared towards a co-evolutionary process that would come up eventually with a circular economy and the sharing economy, right? It's really important that this be a multidimensional system as compared to what we have today. Because in a city, many things matter. It's not just profit, it's also health, politics, education, spirituality, justice, work, you know, all of that comes together in a city. But then strangely enough, it's being mapped on a one-dimensional quantity, which is money. So there's so many goals, but optimization for one quantity, and optimization is always optimizing one quantity, the goal function. It neglects all goals but one. So this is the problem. A typical supply network today looks like this, you know, pretty hierarchical. A typical metabolic network instead looks like this, very different. There are circular processes. In fact, nature is more or less a perfect circular economy, right? It reuses everything. Take ecosystems as examples, or take our body as examples. There's not just one feedback loop, say, based on water, but there are many feedback loops, you know, for carbohydrates, proteins, vitamins, minerals, and so on. So this would be a paradigm change, because with a multidimensional value exchange system, there are many more possibilities to find solutions that benefit all. The space of possible solutions would be significantly increased. And that's why we have been working on this Finance 4 system and actually implemented a demonstrator that you can use for yourself and, you know, for student projects and so on. And clearly, if you have multiple currencies, then you can do things that you cannot do with one-dimensional currency. So there would be benefit of creating more balanced accounts to engage not just in profit maximization, but to engage in many more different activities. And personal digital assistants could support this process, as I'm describing it in a document called Interaction Support Processor, right? So altogether, there would be a new paradigm to go away from top-down control and manipulation to empowerment and coordination, right? Today, we're living in a pretty much over-regulated world, but we should learn to design systems that help people do the right thing. Systems that would be able to self-organize, as this particular example shows, where basically almost nobody has to stop because everyone finds a gap in the traffic flow. It's this particular sign of the intersection that makes it possible, because we have one-dimensional flow in front, opposite flow in the back, and in between there's a buffer that allows people to adjust their speed to find a gap for them. Now this can be automated using the Internet of Things. So 300 years after the invisible hand was incepted, the Internet of Things can make self-organization work. And we've shown it. For example, for cities, where we have found a simple principle to create self-organized green waves. So we harness complexity by decentralization, using opportunities, gaps in the flow, And actually, it turns out that decentralized control can outsmart centralized control. So we have been able to create benefits for all modes of transport and for environment, which is very astonishing, because we had to compete with the best solutions in the market. And this has been implemented in several cities and tested carefully. And in fact, it was superior. Now, this kind of self-organization principle could also be applied to democracy, where we should try to boost collective intelligence. So first of all, if we design for values, if we digitally upgrade democracy, what should we keep in mind? Well, first of all, human dignity and human rights, freedom, self-determination, pluralism, protection of minorities, division of power, checks and balances, participation, transparency, fairness, justice, legitimacy, and privacy, for example, right? So technology should not be contradicting those constitutional values, but they should support these values because they're important for our society, we believe. So we should learn to build digital democracy, design for values, and here I'm talking about bringing the best ideas of many minds together. So today, as I pointed out before, we have a lot of complex problems. Those complex problems cannot easily be understood. It requires to look at them from different perspectives and then to combine those different perspectives in order to get a better picture of the problem and possible solution. Also, different solution approaches should be combined with each other, which surprisingly often improves the outcome. So if you combine the best solution with apparently inferior solutions, it would often improve the solution. That means diversity wins, not the best. It's a cooperative effort in a sense, right? And this collective intelligence can be supported by digital platforms, in particular, certain kind of incentive systems. One of them is called minorities report, not minority report, which is just the opposite. This approach can actually outperform yes, no democracies and markets. And we actually have in mind really to combine the best solutions around the entire world because each culture is full of success principles. If we learn to quantify them and operationalize them and combine them with each other, I'm sure we could find much better solutions. So diversity is a great value and we should harvest it together. So I'm eventually coming towards the end. I'd like to say that network effects make all the difference. We are now experiencing a transition from a component-dominated to an interaction-dominated world. Combinatorial innovation, I mean, information ecosystems can benefit the economy. Collective intelligence can benefit our society, and multidimensional real-time feedback can benefit our environment. So be a game changer, right? And then make sure you're not being remotely controlled. Break through the matrix, and help build the next civilization, a civilization that will be built on our values, not a dystopian future, but in a sense, perhaps a utopian one, right? What we certainly can learn is to overcome this monopoly system that we're living in today. We should rather learn to build something that we could call sociopolis, where polis stands for city, right? Connected world of cities and regions where we come up with diverse solutions and help each other and learn from each other. This is how I imagine it. In fact, there are some things that we can do right now, better tomorrow than any day later. It has turned out that actually so-called citizens councils in German, Bürgerräte, are very powerful tools to refresh democracy and come up with solutions in difficult situations and settings. Some years ago, actually back in 2016, I believe, yes, we've written, Stefan Klauser and I have written an article, How to Make Democracy Work in the Digital Age, where we talked about how to create collective intelligence through massive online deliberation platforms. Such a thing is in existence right now. Look at this title over here. So Taiwan is making democracy work again, right? They did it. And it's time to pay attention to learn from Taiwan, because they are really a modern digital democracy where people, in a sense, are overcoming controversy, finding solutions that work as much as that can be done for everyone. So they've built a platform that helps consensus formation to happen. And once that consensus has come about, basically this consensus is put into law. This is how it works. So in a sense, civic hackers have helped to find a new way to run the country, and it has found a lot of attention. I don't understand why we don't have that already in Germany and Switzerland, in Europe, and all over democracies that certainly need to be refreshed digitally. So I'm closing by saying, I firmly believe that the success principles in a complex digital world, that means in future, will be co-learning and co-creation, coordination, cooperation, and co-evolution. So we should all be part of this, and we should do this now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much too, Dirk Helbing. We just start a new research project, which has in the subtitle co-valuation. So if you take this on your slide, it's another aspect. So we are doing this.
Right. Actually, we call it the co-star principles, you know. Like we have a paper with 10 principles. I'm sure there are 100 co-principles, you know, and they're all worth looking at.
Yeah.
Because we certainly need to learn how to do things together and how to do it in a way that creates benefits all together, individually, but also system-wide. And that's kind of the art that we need to learn. The symbiosis, to create symbiosis in the system.
Yeah. Okay, so now we have some time for discussion, and the floor is open. I would like to suggest that everyone who wants to ask a question should make a star or a cross in the chat, so I can see I get a list and can call the people who want to say something. It's better than raising hands or so. And Dirk Helbing, you can finish your presentation so we can switch back to a better display.
All right.
So who is first?
We already have a question in the chat, right? But I think it was typed in earlier.
Yes.
So we could start with it, or it's more a point of discussion.
Sophia Zhang, do you want to ask a question? No. Or it's a comment.
I just want to say something on this question. So China is not the only country to blame, you know. In fact, in China, there's the Sesame credit score, but in other countries, there are other kinds of citizen scores, such as the customer lifetime value, you know, where basically the amount of money somebody would spend in a lifetime would matter for the offers that the person gets. I mean, the products and services offered, the prices offered, maybe even the rights offered, you know, and if all of that has an impact on triage decisions, you know, it's really making me furious. I think this is all very inadequate, really, because it violates human dignity. To measure people all the time, to give them no chance really to respond, to change the system, to represent a person by one number, all of this is very inadequate and not consistent with human dignity. Yeah, same thing certainly applies to other citizen scores.
Okay, there are still no raising hands, no questions. So then I would like to start with a question.
Sure.
You are a physicist and also a sociologist, and you know, we talked about ideas like those of Pentland in the MIT to renew the discipline of social physics. And I found this also in your vita, that you deal with this kind of ideas, and you have a lot of criteria. You gave us a lot of criteria, which helps us to distinguish bad ways of a top-down government or governance, by using AI, the AI god, or something which is a centralized power or invisible power, and to bring this power to the bottom. So I feel you are working on criteria, but my question is, what exactly is the difference to these approaches of social physics? If we think of some basic principles like crowdsourcing, so another term is wisdom of crowds. So the idea which is very common in Web 2.0, that the organizations, the corporations only build an infrastructure for the masses who should bring together all their ideas. And in many parts of the platform economy, there are ideas to bring these ideas forward, to combine them, to get ideas. Could you summarize in a way what is the guarantee if we want to follow you? What is the guarantee why your approach is to combine the bottom-up activities by digital technology will not lead in this direction?
So I'm trying to answer this question, which was quite complex. Let me start with social physics, okay? So social physics started with the observation that also in social systems, there are certain kinds of phenomena that can be understood with models that are similar to models that we know from physics. For example, pedestrian crowd dynamics, lane formation, oscillations, stripe formation in pedestrian crowds. We can understand congestion patterns in traffic flows. There are actually many different kinds of patterns. All of that can be compared with data. There are models for epidemic spreading. So here basically the physics approach has been very successful. But we have to realize also that is limited. And this field has developed eventually into what we call computational social science, which is multi, and transdisciplinary, where many different scientific communities come together, not just physicists. So there's social scientists, there are computer scientists, there are data scientists, there are ethicists, and so on, that would work together on eye level, so they would learn from each other. And computational social science brings together different methods, which ranges from mathematical modeling over computer simulation, over experiments, to data science. And so it's really in multi and inter in every single respect, you know. And that's what makes it so exciting. And the teams are highly diverse. And this has really brought us forward, in particular, as more data has become available in past years, which was lacking in the social sciences previously. Okay, now when I started my work at ETH Zurich, you know, I thought I would do the same thing I've done for pedestrians and traffic and so on. I would do that for many areas of society, you know, including cooperation, social norms, the moral values, crime, revolutions, and all this. And in fact, we have published about all those different subjects, right? And I thought we would come up by the end of my career. I would come up with my team with better and better models. And so we would get a pretty good simulation of what is going on in our society and in our economy. That was the idea. And then eventually I realized that we were in the process of modeling a world that was about to end because of the digital revolution, which is going to change the economy and how it works in society fundamentally. Every single area of our society is changing completely. So, you know, basically we had a model for a world that was about to disappear. I made clear to me that instead we would have to come up with a framework that would be suitable to guide us for the future, to build systems that would work for us and for the environment in the future. It was clear that as the world is getting ever more networked, the systems we had to deal with were more and more complex. And complex systems have this property that they tend to self-organize. And that can be annoying when this produces congestion or collapse of stock markets or crowd disasters. But also we can learn that by changing the interactions between the system components, the system would basically learn to come up with the desired outcome by itself through self-organization. So that's a matter of mechanism design, network design, and so on. A very exciting field, I still believe. But also, self-organization means that not everything is centrally controlled, right? Also, we don't need to collect all the data of everything forever. But the only thing that's needed is basically a local real-time feedback of the right kinds of quantities. And then we can forget that data again. We don't have to mass surveil, we don't have to do that on a global scale and the central super intelligent system, but local real-time feedback would be enough to allow for that self-organization. And we would just need to learn what would be the right kind of interactions for this. And certainly, social media platforms of today are not designed in a way that is favorable for constructive dialogue and for democracy. We see a lot of hate speech, fake news, and so on. And this is by design, by bad design in a sense. It was not maybe intended, but it's because those engineers apparently don't know enough about how social systems work in order to come up with better designs. And I think scientists and engineers at universities should show the way, how to do value sensitive design, how to consider collective effects, self-organization, societal scale outcomes over longer period of times. And that is what we need to learn. Of course, there's no one world formula that Dirk Helbing could tell you or would want to tell you. It's something that we need to figure out together, basically. In small scale experiments, we can then scale up as they work well.
Okay, thank you very much. Matthias has now a question, and Irina Gurevich is second then.
Yeah, or maybe we take the question from the audience first. So I don't know. Maybe you can read it in the chat by yourself. It's about data and AI.
Well, I should say one thing. We have now such powerful technology. It's not just big data and AI. It's also gene editing. It's kind of this nano neurocogno technology that's coming up. You can do wonderful things with it, but in the hands of the wrong people, it can be terribly misused. Just suppose these methods would be used for war or just for commercial interests. If you just optimize the health system for efficiency, then basically a lot of people will die through triage decisions. I think the world has become very dangerous as those technologies have become so powerful. In many cases, you don't need to be a billionaire to have an impact and potentially a global impact. A garage and some high technology, high tech, would be possible, would be sufficient basically to do very good or very bad things on a large scale. And just suppose the release of a virus or whatever, and therefore, I think we really need, in the digital age, a new framework for society, a social contract that's renewed, that takes care of automation, and that maybe there would be less work, maybe very different work. We need to have an eye on the environment and so on. So we need a new framework that's pretty clear. And a lot of people think, actually, we would like to collaborate with others rather than compete against everyone and everything, as we've learned to do that in the past. In a networked world, that doesn't seem to be the right paradigm anymore. But we are not yet there. And most likely we would need a new kind of system that would include what I call democratic capitalism. Just suppose if all the money in the world, or most of it, would be owned by the people of the world, by humanity, then we, the people, could decide what to use that money for and where to invest. It wouldn't have to be based on profit maximization. If we think this is important and that is important, we would just do that. It would be a very different system. Same thing with data, you know. I'm very much in favor of creating platforms that enable data sharing plus informational self-determination, you know. We can assume that today there are these centralized global data collections about everything and everyone in high detail with all the digital doodles that I mentioned before, but we have no control. I think we should give people control over their data so they can decide what companies would have access to what kind of data for what purposes. And then we would have our human dignity, informational self-determination back. But also we could open up the data and say, okay, hey, I would share this data with all scientific institutions or with all small and medium-sized companies and spin-off companies or with all companies, you know, with NGOs or whatever. So I think as there would be a competition for data access that would have to be granted by people, there would be a competition for trust. And in the end, we would end up in a trustable digital society where most people share quite a lot of data because we've learned that cooperation is better than a battle of everyone against everyone else. So we would hopefully learn to share data, so not only big business can do interesting things with data, but everyone who shows that they're not misusing personal and other data would have access to that data treasure that we would jointly collect, in a sense. You know, and if you don't do that, my prediction is a lot more people will die because we'll not be able to solve the existential problems of the future to the same extent as we can do that by collaboration.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And Matthias, do you want to ask a question?
Just want to say, you know, responsibility requires from us really to change the system so less people would die in this so-called overpopulated world, you know.
My question maybe it relates a bit to so how could we go that way to achieve this where the whole world is in essence collaborating and everything, because right now I have a bit the feeling, for example, that in Europe, in the European Union, there's this kind of approach that a lot of countries try to come together and to very democratically decide everything. But at the same time, we also see the challenges or the downsides of that system. So with the current vaccine crisis, for example, it looks like that this process took so long that everyone else who decided on their own, they just ordered the vaccines, and the European Union, they maybe decided everyone is happy now, but it took so long that now we have a disadvantage. And I wonder whether, so we could see the European Union as a first mover that has now to compete against China and the US, who act very or who can make easier or quicker decisions. And I wonder whether we have now a disadvantage, and that could just lead to the world becoming more totalitarian instead of becoming more collaborative, because in the short term this quicker decisions could win. I'm not sure whether you know what I mean,
So
but
first of all, we have to realize that in some areas of digital technology and big data, Europe is largely, behind other countries. And if you want to catch up, so there's an exponential acceleration in the digital realm. We all know this, So if you manage to come up with the same exponential acceleration, suppose we would be able to do that, then still, because of the delay, the distance to other countries who have been first would be increasing over time. So doing the same thing later is not a solution. We need a different paradigm to be able to compete. We need a quicker growth curve. And the one growth curve that I know is faster is combinatorial innovation, right? A combinatorial factorial curve. So basically, this is what we need to do, is basically no other chance than being more open and collaborative and doing things together. Most companies couldn't afford to invest the amount of money to ever be competitive with the big platforms that are already there. So we can only do that together, but of course that can in principle be exploited by others, like of course Chinese companies or US companies could also try to access that kind of common good that we may try to create. So we need additional principles such as reciprocity. We need, because you can have a platform which basically works like this, that you say, people who behave responsibly and collaboratively and share, they would get access to more data and more functionality. So basically it creates a mutual benefit. And yeah, it's a difficult process that requires smart design and learning on many sides, and some legal guidance too. But I think there's no other opportunity than doing exactly this. So here's another question. Well, I mean, it seems to be related to somehow this question about collective intelligence, about the wisdom of crowds versus the madness of crowds. And in fact, that is again a design issue. So all of that depends very much on how people interact. So the process that I have in mind is basically a four-step process. In the first step, people would independently search for solutions, explore kind of the solution space, collect information, and should not be influenced or manipulated in that stage. Then there would be a second stage where people would exchange what they found, discuss that, bring it all together, create an overview in a sense of that kind of situation. Then there would be a third stage where after the different facts and arguments have been kind of sorted out and different perspectives on the problem have been identified, representatives of those different perspectives would be invited to a round table where those people would have the task to figure out by deliberation innovative integrated solutions that work for many. And there would be then a number of integrated solutions, maybe none that really satisfies everyone. So there would be a fourth phase, which is voting among those integrated collective intelligence solutions. And it wouldn't have to be a majority decision. It could be other voting rules as well that actually are maybe better to ensure that as many people as possible would benefit from the solution eventually implemented. That process takes time. Part of it, however, can be supported by digital platforms, as they actually do that successfully in Taiwan. So it has been pointed out that Corona response would be an issue, and that maybe the democratic approach would be not suited for this. Not true at all. You know, there are some dictatorial or authoritarian countries that have done very badly in terms of Corona. There have been some democratic countries that have been doing very well in terms of Corona. Taiwan is among those countries. I think they had very few deaths, less than 10, if I remember well. I may be wrong, but anyway, they have very low death rates. And this is a digital democracy that's really trying to harvest the collective intelligence of people and using crowdsourcing, and they've learned how to do that well, you know. So we could learn from them, and maybe others too. Switzerland is very much, you know, a country that is built on principles of collective intelligence. Unfortunately, we don't have that implemented digitally yet. I've been pushing for this for many years and telling them, you know, it would be a wonderful model to export to the world. Just do this. Hasn't happened yet, but maybe it will.
Sounds like hard work in Switzerland. Okay, thank you very much, Dirk Helbing. If there is another question, maybe in German, it's also okay. Please give me a sign. Otherwise, I would ask a last small question. I would more or less like to say that your idea of multidimensionality and diversity, which I think is crucial to your approach, which you put also to the economy. So that would be very interesting if you could tell us a little bit more what you mean by qualified money and other other experiments going on, and in the digital world, I'm thinking of Tauschringe and alternative kinds of monies or vouchers or voucher democracy and these things. But what I really like is the idea that we need multidimensionality because we have not only one dimension to pass something to account, to bring something to equilibration. So we need to put quality into the way we bring things together, and that sounds very interesting.
All right, so you know what we're trying at the moment is with all the data of the world to optimize the future of the world and then basically enforce the best possible path by making people do what the system wants them to do. That was kind of the idea, and you know, to some extent it sounds plausible, but on the other hand, of course, that doesn't work because there's innovation happening all the time. So predictions are bad, and there will always be better solutions that we would prevent as we impose a certain solution and behavior on people. So We need a system that is more flexible and allows for more creativity and innovation. In fact, I even think this attempt to optimize the world is making things worse after a certain point, of optimization. Because in order to optimize, you need a one-dimensional goal function, implicitly or explicitly. Because you want to compare two solutions, say this is better than that one, so you need to make a greater, smaller comparison that requires one-dimensionality. So those goal functions are one-dimensional, and it means like as you optimize one thing, be it profit, be it sustainability, be it fresh air, be it happiness, be it health, whatever you choose, you push back all the other goals. And so after say 10, 20, 30 years of optimizing for that one goal that you consider the right choice, and there's no science to tell you which goal function to choose actually. After that time, you would probably see that those other things that you have neglected will have created huge problems. Now, nature doesn't do that optimization. It is based on co-evolution. So it steadily improves in many places, and so it gets better and better, but it's not trying to optimize one quantity. This nature, we can imagine as an ecosystem, and in those ecosystems, we have multiple feedback loops. So we want to learn from nature and from the success of millions of years of co-evolution, and we should use multidimensional real-time feedback systems. In fact, you have mentioned the great success of local currencies. There are some historically documented cases how fantastic that has worked. So what we propose is that a lot of new currencies could be created, like a CO2 currency, a noise currency, a glass currency, a steel currency, whatever resource, whatever thing seems important to you. Somebody would come up with a measurement procedure, and then based on that measurement procedure, an incentive system or currency would be defined. So measurement procedures define new currencies. Everyone could come up with a new currency. Of course, there could be millions. A lot of these currencies may be useless, used by almost nobody, and they would just disappear, But some of them would turn out to be useful, and they would spread, and more people would use them. And so based on co-evolution, we would learn which are the feedbacks that are helping us to get things organized well, to coordinate each other, to live in harmony with nature, to create a circular economy. So yeah, based on experimenting as nature does, on small scales, it could be villages, it could be cities, it could be companies, in different environments, we could try different combinations of new kinds of measurement-based currencies in order to get certain kind of things established. Make sure the plants are watered, not forgotten, make sure that the dishes are cleaned by somebody, make sure that, we achieve our goals more successfully, Even if genius politician or a genius manager with the very best intentions would want to want to improve the world, the tools they have available today, such as money, one-dimensional money in a sense, are not good enough really for them to steer the system to do what they want. even less so to create self-organizing systems, which most of them are based on multidimensional feedbacks, right? So certainly multidimensional real-time feedbacks are needed to allow for a lot of self-organizing systems, and also for better control of complex systems.
Thank you very much. Okay, and thanks again for your inspiring talk and the discussion. There's a lot of stuff we could and should take home and have to think about. And it's a lot of ideas we can take at the ETech to improve our research questions and to improve our agenda. So I hope we stay in contact, and again, Dirk Helbing, thank you very much. So we are at the end of our lecture for today, and I will hand over to Matthias, because he is the one who closes the session and gives us some information about the next one.
Exactly. Thank you, Jörn, and also thank you, Professor Helbing, for the inspiring talk. I think it was an interesting view on what needs to be done, and also shows how much how everything kind of interrelates to come up with good solutions. As already mentioned, it's now my time for me to say goodbye to you for today. Our next talk will already be in about 2 weeks from Michael Bernstein from Stanford. He will talk about computation and organization, the future of work and workers. So I met him at a workshop. He did some research on, for example, things like a fair crowdsourcing, which is also a certain something that highlights a negative aspect of the digitization of the labor market. So I think it will also be an interesting talk. And I don't want to take away more of your time. We already took the whole slot you reserved. So thank you very much for your attendance, and it would be great to see you again in 2 weeks. So have a nice evening.